"Excuse me, ma'am," the flight attendant began, her voice a low, insistent whisper. "I need to verify your seat. I believe there must be some mistake." The woman in the impeccable suit looked up from her tablet. "There's no mistake, Victoria," she replied, her tone even. "This is my assigned seat." The flight attendant's smile was thin and brittle. "This airline maintains a certain standard for this cabin. You don't seem to fit the profile. You'll have to move or I will be forced to call security." And just like that, the quiet hum of the first-class cabin was broken. Passengers instinctively reached for their phones, their screens lighting up to capture what would soon become one of the costliest acts of discrimination in corporate history. The successful black woman stood her ground as two airline security officers towered over her, their faces etched with contempt. "Ma'am, you need to come with us now," one of them barked, loud enough for the entire plane to hear. They grabbed her arms, their grips tight and unyielding, and began to drag her down the aisle. She moved past the shocked faces of other passengers, past flight attendants who suddenly found the ceiling panels intensely interesting. The security officers exchanged a self-satisfied smirk, convinced this was just another difficult passenger who didn't know her place. But on this particular day, aboard Skybay Airlines Flight 3429, they were all participants in a catastrophic miscalculation. In their haste to enforce an unspoken code, they had just lost the one opportunity that would have saved their company from ruin, all because they failed to recognize the woman they were so publicly humiliating. If you have ever witnessed a casual act of injustice and wished, just for a moment, that you could see the consequences unfold in real time, then this is the story you have been waiting for. It is a tale of karma delivered not by fate, but by a balance sheet. It all began that morning. Victoria King was not a woman born to wealth or privilege. At 48, she was a living testament to what sheer determination could build against all odds. As the founder and CEO of Global Transit Solutions, she commanded the largest travel logistics empire on the planet, a titan of industry that decided how, when, and where the executives of Fortune 500 companies traveled the globe. Her signature on a contract could elevate an airline to new heights or condemn it to bankruptcy. That morning, in her sprawling Manhattan penthouse overlooking Central Park, Victoria reviewed the final details of the largest contract her company had ever awarded. It was a staggering $5.2 billion deal, an 8-year exclusive partnership that would serve as a lifeline for Skybay Airlines, rescuing the struggling carrier from the brink of financial collapse. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from James Chen, her chief operating officer. "Board approved. Legal has finalized. Ready for your signature." James was the public face of her company, the representative who attended galas and press conferences. His visibility allowed Victoria the anonymity she preferred, leaving most of the world unaware of who truly held the power. She replied with her usual precision. "Good. Atlanta meeting at 3 p.m. We'll sign unless issues arise. Keep Continental and Meridian on standby as contingencies." Victoria always had a backup plan. 15 years as CEO had taught her that lesson well. At 10:30, her driver pulled up to Terminal 5. Victoria stepped out, her tailored Armani suit and confident stride turning heads. She had deliberately chosen to fly commercial today, forgoing the company jet. It was her practice to experience the service of a potential partner firsthand. This flight on Skybay Airlines was the final test. At the first-class check-in counter, she placed her passport and premium boarding pass on the polished granite. The attendant barely looked up, though her gaze lingered on Victoria's face a moment too long. "Are you sure you're at the right counter, ma'am?" she asked, the doubt in her voice unmistakable. Victoria maintained her composure. The attendant subjected her documents to an unusual level of scrutiny, turning the passport over and over, checking the boarding pass against her system multiple times. "I'll need to see your ID again," she said after a long pause. Victoria complied without a word, though she couldn't help but notice the white businessman behind her being waved through with a warm smile and a cursory glance at his papers. As the minutes ticked by, 2 more passengers were welcomed and checked in while Victoria waited. "Is there a problem with my documentation?" Victoria finally asked, her tone firm but professional. "Just following protocol," the attendant replied, picking up a phone to call for a supervisor without making eye contact. Victoria discreetly pulled out her own phone and typed a message to her executive team. "Flag on Skybay Airlines." The supervisor arrived and began the entire verification process anew. "Ms. King, Could you verify your destination? He asked, despite holding the boarding pass that clearly stated it. Atlanta, Victoria replied. And the purpose of your travel? It was a question rarely asked in a first-class line. Business, she said, the irony thick enough to taste. The business, of course, was the $5.2 billion contract that would save his very airline. After nearly 30 minutes, she was finally cleared, but not before the supervisor made a small, deliberate notation on her boarding pass. What does that mark indicate? She asked. Just a routine security designation, he replied with a practiced, hollow smile. Nothing to be concerned about. The meaning of that routine designation became clear at the TSA checkpoint. Victoria was immediately directed out of the priority lane for additional screening. An agent pulled on a pair of blue nitrile gloves. We'll need to conduct an additional search, he informed her. Victoria stood in silent observation as her meticulously packed carry-on was emptied. The agent roughly handled a folder, creating a small tear in the corner of the multi-billion-dollar contract's signature page. Her grandmother's pearl earrings were dumped onto a metal table. One bounced off the edge, and a passing agent crushed it under his heel. Sorry about that, he muttered, not even breaking stride. Victoria carefully picked up the fractured heirloom, a quiet fury building within her. She documented the damage with a few discreet photos before sending another update to Chen. By the time she reached the gate, the flight was delayed. When boarding finally began, she presented her pass. The gate agent scanned it, then paused, her eyes flicking from the screen to Victoria's face with poorly concealed surprise. First class is boarding, Victoria stated gently. Yes, I see that, the agent replied, her tone suggesting she saw something else entirely. She scanned the pass again before reluctantly letting her through. At the aircraft door, the lead flight attendant's welcome smile faltered. Oh, she said, looking at the ticket. First class is to your left. The cabin was half empty. Victoria found her seat, 2A, and settled in. The man in 2B, a portly executive in his 60s, glanced up with undisguised annoyance, pointedly shifting away from her. Soon, a different flight attendant approached her. Excuse me, I need to check your boarding pass, please. Victoria produced it. The attendant studied it with an odd intensity. I think there's been a mistake, she said, just loud enough for the man in 2B to hear. There's no mistake, Victoria replied calmly. This is my assigned seat. Her seatmate cleared his throat theatrically. Is there a problem here? He asked the flight attendant, speaking as if Victoria wasn't there. I paid a great deal for a peaceful experience. The flight attendant gave him a conspiratorial smile. Just double-checking something, sir. Well, I'm not sure she belongs in this section, he continued. These seats are quite expensive. Victoria turned to face him directly. I am well aware of the price, sir. Just as I am aware of the cost of this tablet, this watch, and, most importantly, the cost of my time, which is currently being wasted. The man blinked, momentarily stunned into silence. The flight attendant's smile tightened. Your pass seems to be in order, ma'am, but our system shows a discrepancy. Would you mind if I took a photo of it? Victoria raised an eyebrow. In 15 years of executive travel, I have never had my boarding pass photographed. Is this a new Skybay Airlines policy? It's just to resolve the confusion. What confusion exactly? Victoria's tone was still pleasant, but there was steel beneath it now. This is the third time my documents have been questioned. Is there a specific reason? I'm just doing my job, the attendant said defensively. As am I, Victoria replied, turning her attention back to her tablet. The flight attendant retreated, taking the boarding pass with her. Victoria noted that it was not returned. 30 minutes after takeoff, an uneasy calm had settled. Drink orders were taken, though Victoria's water arrived long after her seatmate's scotch. She noticed the purser and the flight attendant in a hushed, intense conversation at the front of the cabin, their glances darting in her direction. Sensing the next chapter of her ordeal was about to begin, Victoria quietly set her tablet to record video, positioning it on her tray table. A few minutes later, the two women stood beside her row. Ms. King, the purser began, her voice low but firm. Our system has confirmed a computer error with your seat assignment. We will need to relocate you to economy class. The statement hung in the air, audacious in its dishonesty. That's peculiar, Victoria said, her voice clear and measured. My pass was scanned successfully, my seat was confirmed multiple times, and I have been sitting here for nearly an hour. It's an unfortunate technical issue, the purser insisted. We need you to gather your belongings and move to seat 27C. A middle seat. The pettiness was almost impressive. I understand you believe you are following procedure, Victoria said. However, my ticket is valid. My seat is confirmed. I am not moving. The man beside her scoffed. Just do what they ask. You're making a scene. Victoria ignored him. This isn't optional, ma'am, the purser warned. You need to move now. Around them, passengers were now openly watching. A woman across the aisle was discreetly recording. Victoria picked up her own phone and began to record openly, making no attempt to hide it. Please put that away, the flight attendant snapped. Recording is not permitted. That's incorrect, Victoria replied coolly. FAA regulations do not prohibit it, so long as it doesn't interfere with flight safety. I am simply documenting this conversation for accuracy. The purser's face flushed with anger. This is becoming disruptive. I agree, Victoria said. It became disruptive the moment you attempted to remove me from my paid seat based on an unsubstantiated claim. I am sitting quietly, causing no disruption at all. A tense silence followed. Then, the cabin speakers crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We're experiencing a minor security concern and will be making an unscheduled landing at the next available airport. This is purely a precaution. A ripple of murmurs went through the cabin. Dozens of eyes turned to Victoria. She knew with chilling certainty that she was the security concern. This diversion was a calculated escalation to remove her from the aircraft. With deliberate calm, she sent a text to her executive team. The plane touched down in Charlotte, taxiing not to a gate but to a remote corner of the airfield where security vehicles waited, their lights flashing in the twilight. This stop was for her alone. The aircraft door opened. 2 uniformed security officers boarded, speaking briefly with the purser, who pointed directly at Victoria. As they walked down the aisle, she could feel the tension in the air. Ma'am, one officer said, stopping beside her. We need you to gather your things and come with us. Victoria looked up, her expression a mask of composure. May I ask why I am being removed from this flight? The crew has reported a disturbance, he answered vaguely. What disturbance specifically? The officer's patience snapped. Recognizing that this was a battle she could not win in the moment, Victoria did not resist. But as they gripped her arms and escorted her from her seat, she maintained her dignity. Every passenger was watching, their phones held aloft like candles at a vigil. What none of them could see, what the crew and the officers could never imagine, was that as Victoria King walked off that plane, she wasn't just leaving a flight. In her mind, she was already rewriting a $5.2 billion contract, calculating with cold, precise clarity just how this humiliation would become the most expensive customer service failure in aviation history. I'm entitled to that information, Victoria stated, her voice a calm counterpoint to the tension in the air. The flight crew reported your behavior as a risk to the flight, the second officer replied, resorting to a vague, indefensible accusation. That isn't a specific reason, she countered evenly. What behavior, precisely, was deemed disruptive? Instead of releasing his hold, the officer's grip tightened, a silent admission that this was about power, not procedure. Victoria said nothing more, but mentally catalogued each escalation of force against her unwavering cooperation. As they reached the end of the jetway, the second officer spoke into his radio, requesting backup. The terminal gate area was a sea of travelers, their heads turning at the jarring sight. A poised black woman in a tailored business suit being forcefully escorted by 2 white airport security officers. A small crowd of passengers from her flight followed, their phones held high, recording every moment. The unwelcome audience only seemed to fuel the officer's aggression. Just keep moving, the taller officer growled, his hand now clamping down on Victoria's upper arm with bruising force. You are hurting me, Victoria stated, her voice still controlled but pitched just loud enough for the nearest witnesses to hear. It was not a plea, it was a documentation of excessive force. The second officer moved to her other side. Together they quickened their pace, practically dragging her between them as they carved a path through the throng of people. The heels of her shoes scraped against the polished floor, struggling to find purchase. The indignity of it all was a stark visual contradiction to her professional appearance and steadfast composure. Travelers stopped in their tracks, their own phones instinctively rising to capture the scene. In the digital age, Injustice was a spectacle, and this image, a composed executive being manhandled through an airport, was an incendiary one. "What did she do?" someone in the crowd called out. "Nothing," a passenger who was still recording answered loudly. "They're removing her for sitting in her assigned first-class seat." The officers pulled harder, nearly lifting Victoria off her feet as they steered her toward a side corridor, away from the prying eyes and lenses of the main concourse. It was then, in the relative privacy of the hallway, that the situation took an even darker turn. "First class on this airline isn't for everyone," the taller officer muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. It was a poisoned whisper, not for the witnesses or his partner, but for her alone. A private dose of racist contempt delivered beneath the public confrontation. They stopped at a nondescript door marked "Security Personnel Only." The second officer swiped a keycard, and as they began to pull Victoria across the threshold, she finally broke her silence with words that would prove prophetic. "This will be the most expensive mistake Skybay Airlines ever makes." Her voice was calm, measured, and utterly certain. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the serene confidence of someone accustomed to making billion-dollar decisions. The taller officer snorted. "Yeah, we hear that all the time." The door clicked shut behind them, obscuring the view of the trailing passengers, but their phones had captured everything: the force, the comment, the warning, and the dismissal. Within minutes, those videos would begin their journey across the digital world, the first ripples of a coming tsunami. "You'll need to provide a statement," the second officer said, sliding a form across the metal table in front of her. His tone was perfunctory, implying the outcome was already decided. Victoria ignored the paper. "I'd like to make a phone call." The taller officer laughed. "This isn't jail, lady. You don't get a phone call." "Actually," Victoria replied smoothly, "according to TSA regulations, passengers detained by airport security for non-criminal matters retain the right to communicate with outside parties." The precise citation of a rule they themselves likely didn't know caught them off guard. They exchanged an uncertain glance. "And what important call do you need to make?" the taller officer sneered, his condescension layered with assumptions. "Big business meeting?" "You have no idea," she said quietly. 3 words, spoken without heat, yet carrying the weight of the reckoning already in motion beyond the walls of that small, harsh room. 20 minutes passed in composed silence. She refused to fill out their form, requesting only her belongings. Finally, unnerved by her unwavering dignity, they relented. The taller officer slid her purse across the table with deliberate carelessness. "Your flight has already departed," the second officer informed her, as if it were a victory. "We can book you on a later economy flight if you cooperate." Victoria simply opened her purse, took out her phone and placed it on the table. She pressed a few buttons and activated the speaker. The call connected after 2 rings. "James Chen." The voice was crisp, professional. "James, it's Victoria," she said, her voice steady as steel. "I've just been physically removed from a Skybay Airlines flight following multiple instances of discrimination." A beat of stunned silence, then a rush of concern. "What? Are you all right? Do you need legal?" Victoria cut him off, her focus absolute. "What I need is for you to execute Plan B. The $5.2 billion contract is canceled, effective immediately. Move everything to Continental." The officers stared, their expressions slack with confusion. This wasn't the tearful call to a husband they'd expected. That number, $5.2 billion, hung in the air like a physical blow. James's voice returned, measured but radiating shock. "Victoria, that's their lifeline contract. Their stock will collapse." "I'm aware," Victoria stated, leaving no room for debate. "Do it now, full press release within the hour. Make it crystal clear why this is happening." "Yes, ma'am," James replied, all hesitation gone. "Continental has been on standby since your texts. They're ready. The videos are already everywhere," he added. "Passengers uploaded them before the plane even took off. You're trending. #SkybayShame is the top hashtag in the country." The taller officer's face had drained of all color. His smirk was replaced by a mask of dawning horror. "Excellent," Victoria said. "And James, make sure the press release includes specifics. Names, times, direct quotes. I want every investor and every competitor to understand the precise cost of doing business this way." "Understood. Have Marcus bring the car around. I'll be meeting with Continental within the hour. He's already en route, James confirmed. Victoria, are you safe? She looked directly at the two officers. I'm fine, James. I believe these gentlemen are about to become extraordinarily accommodating. She ended the call, returning the phone to her purse with unhurried grace. Then she met their anxious gazes. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only when the shorter officer reached for his radio with a trembling hand. The taller one, the one who had made the comment, stood frozen. Ma'am, he finally stammered, his voice stripped of all its earlier arrogance. Who are you? Victoria reached into her purse, retrieved a simple cream-colored business card, and placed it on the table between them. Her name, her title, and a corporate logo. In the context of the phone call, it was a declaration of war. CEO, Global Transit Solutions. The officers stared at the card, the full, catastrophic weight of their mistake crashing down upon them. 1,200 miles away, in the executive boardroom of Skybay Airlines, chaos erupted. What do you mean GTS pulled out? CEO Richard Harmon shouted, his face flushed with disbelief. The signing is tomorrow. His chief communications officer stood ashen-faced, her tablet shaking. Sir, they've issued a press release. They're terminating all negotiations. They're moving the entire contract to Continental Airlines. That's impossible, Harmon roared. You don't pivot a $5 billion deal overnight. Sir, they cited systemic discriminatory treatment of their CEO, Victoria King, on one of our flights this morning. Victoria King? Harmon whispered, the blood draining from his face. Victoria King was on our flight? The chief operating officer spun his laptop around. You need to see this. On the screen, a series of viral videos played. Victoria being questioned, confronted, and then dragged through the terminal. The audio was chillingly clear. Oh my God, Harmon breathed. The stock ticker on the wall display suddenly flashed red, the numbers beginning to plummet. Get her on the phone! Get me Victoria King now! We've tried, sir, his assistant said. Her office is directing all calls to their legal department. Then find out where she is, Harmon yelled, desperation shredding his composure. The COO looked up from his screen, his expression grim. According to social media, sir, she's already on her way to Continental headquarters in Atlanta. The words hung in the air, a death sentence for the airline. Back in Charlotte, Victoria King settled into the plush leather of a black Mercedes waiting at the terminal's VIP exit. As the door closed, sealing her in its climate-controlled silence, she took a single deep breath. A breaking news alert lit up her phone. Global Transit Solutions terminates $5 billion Skybay Airlines contract. Below the headline, Skybay's stock ticker showed a vertical red line, down 27% and still falling. Continental's headquarters gleamed against the Atlanta skyline. As Victoria's car arrived, the CEO himself, Thomas Reeves, was waiting with his executive team. Ms. King, Reeves said, extending his hand. We were appalled to hear what happened. Thank you for coming on such short notice. I appreciate your flexibility, Mr. Reeves, Victoria replied, accepting his handshake. As they walked toward the elevators, her phone buzzed incessantly in her purse. 17 missed calls from Richard Harmon. She ignored them all. She recalled flying Continental just 3 months prior, dressed down in casual clothes. No one knew who she was, yet they had treated her like royalty. They had earned this. Meanwhile, in New York, the Skybay boardroom had become a tomb. Our stock has dropped 63%, the CFO reported, his voice tight. Trading will be halted soon. Richard Harmon had slumped into his chair. How did no one recognize her? The question revealed the flaw in his thinking, the assumption that respect was conditional upon status. Sir, an assistant interrupted, holding out a tablet. Ms. King's office sent over their final press release. It goes public in 10 minutes. Harmon read, his face turning gray. They're detailing everything, he whispered. Passenger testimonials, video timestamps, the officers' names. He looked up, his eyes hollow. They have the racial comment, word for word. They weren't just losing a contract. They were becoming a cautionary tale. In Atlanta, Victoria King watched as Thomas Reeves signed the final page. Congratulations, Mr. Reeves, she said. You've just set a new benchmark for passenger dignity and respect. As the meeting concluded, Reeves pulled her aside. I have to ask, he said quietly. Did you plan for this? Victoria met his gaze. Mr. Reeves, no one chooses humiliation as a strategy. What happened today was entirely Sky Bay's doing. She gestured toward the signed contract. How it ends, however, that was my choice. And now, it is yours. This can be an anecdote about one airline's failure, or it can be the beginning of genuine change. All their passengers. The words hung in the air, a final verdict. Before he could even formulate a response, Victoria's phone chimed, a single sharp note in the quiet room. On its screen, a news alert flashed in stark digital type. Sky Bay Airlines stock halted after a 70% freefall. Rumors of bankruptcy are swirling. As Victoria gathered her things to leave the Continental headquarters, James Chen intercepted her, his expression a mix of awe and urgency. "The press release is live," he said, "and interview requests are flooding in. Every major network, every business publication." Victoria gave a slow, deliberate nod, her mind already several moves ahead. The raw, unfiltered story of her ordeal on that Sky Bay flight was already a wildfire on social media, fueled by grainy passenger videos and a chorus of outrage. But the complete narrative, the one with a $5 billion price tag for discrimination, that story was hers alone to write. By morning, the story had broken free from the confines of the business section, erupting into a national conversation. Every major network led with the same indelible image: Victoria King, a portrait of composure, even as she was forcibly removed from a Sky Bay Airlines flight. This was immediately followed by graphics illustrating the staggering financial fallout. In a hastily assembled press conference, a visibly shaken CEO, Richard Harmon, stepped up to a podium, delivering a statement that crisis management experts would later brand as a textbook case of too little, too late. "On behalf of Sky Bay Airlines," he began, his voice strained under the crushing weight of his company's collapsing stock, "I want to offer our deepest and most sincere apologies to Ms. Victoria King for the inexcusable treatment she experienced." He paused, a man drowning in the consequences of his company's actions. "What happened was a complete failure of our values. It does not represent who we are or who we aspire to be." But his words were empty. The market had already rendered its verdict. When trading resumed, Sky Bay's stock didn't just fall, it plummeted, hemorrhaging nearly 80% of its value in less than 24 hours. On financial networks, analysts spoke not of recovery, but of bankruptcy. As one commentator bluntly put it, "This isn't a PR disaster, it's an existential threat." Sky Bay needed that contract to survive. The fallout was swift and brutal. By midday, a wave of terminations swept through the company: the check-in agent, the flight attendants, the purser, the security officers. But the bloodletting didn't stop there. As evening fell, the board of directors issued a stark two-sentence statement. Richard Harmon was resigning, effective immediately. "Leadership must be accountable," it read. "The failures that led to yesterday's events reflect system-wide issues that require new vision and direction." In stark contrast, Victoria King held her own press conference. She stood not as a victim seeking sympathy, but as a leader commanding accountability. The venue was a deliberate choice. Not her own gleaming corporate headquarters, but the auditorium of a historically black university's business school, packed with hundreds of students who hung on her every word. "What happened on that flight was not an isolated incident," Victoria stated, her voice calm and measured, cutting through the media frenzy. "It was the visible symptom of a disease, a bias that infects the travel experience for thousands of people every single day. The only difference," she added, her eyes sweeping across the room, "is that most passengers cannot respond by canceling a $5 billion contract." She methodically dismantled the events, from the discriminatory check-in to the final, physical removal from a seat she had paid for. "These were not random acts of rudeness," she declared. "They were the consistent, predictable results of a single corrosive assumption: that a black woman could not possibly belong in first class. That assumption cost Sky Bay Airlines everything, but its true cost is paid daily by people who lack the power to make their humiliation matter to a corporate bottom line." As she spoke, the cameras cut to the faces of the students, their pens flying across notebooks. They knew they were witnessing more than a news story. They were receiving a masterclass in power, leadership, and the art of turning a crisis into a reckoning. 6 months later, Victoria King walked through the terminal for a continental flight to Paris. The change was palpable. At the first-class counter, the agent greeted her by name before she could even produce her ID. "Good morning, Ms. King. We are honored to have you with us today." There was no hesitation, no second glance, no microscopic flicker of surprise, only the seamless, professional respect she had demanded. As she passed through security, new signs were prominently displayed. Every passenger deserves dignity and respect. Below the text was a QR code, a direct link to the passenger advocacy system she had personally negotiated into her contract with Continental. The ripple effect had spread far beyond a single airline. In the wake of Skybay's spectacular implosion, carriers across the industry had scrambled to overhaul their policies. The hashtag respect is the minimum, had transformed from a viral moment into a lasting movement. Industry reports confirmed a staggering 47% drop in discrimination complaints. Whether driven by ethics or fear, the industry had finally learned that dignity was not just a PR talking point. It was a non-negotiable business priority. Settling into her seat, Victoria observed the flight crew. She watched them interact with every passenger, noting the uniform tone of respect, the consistent level of attention, regardless of race or gender. The subtle, corrosive differences she had spent a career documenting were simply gone. Skybay Airlines, of course, was history. Its fate had been sealed that day in Charlotte. 3 weeks after the contract was pulled, it filed for bankruptcy. Its assets were later absorbed by a competitor for pennies on the dollar, the Skybay name erased from the skies forever. A multi-billion-dollar footnote in aviation history. The individuals involved faced their own quiet reckonings. The security officers found themselves unemployable in the industry. The man whose sneering comment had been captured on video was reportedly last seen working retail in a Charlotte suburb, his career undone by a single casual act of prejudice. But Victoria had wasted no time dwelling on their fates. Her focus was not on ruin, but on building. She had channeled the global attention from the incident into creating lasting, institutional change. Her company launched a prestigious mentorship program for young Black women in business, with Victoria herself personally guiding the next generation of leaders. Her victory was not in the fall of an airline, but in the rise of those who would follow her.